with the Health Efficient. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the social determinants of health and using the PRAPARE tool in eClinicalWorks specifically. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of how we've seen the eClinicalWorks clients implement PRAPARE, and then also do a live demo so you can see what the PRAPARE tool looks like if you're using the smart form in eClinicalWorks. So really we see as people have tried to do a lot of implementations on this, it is a frequent question, where is the best place that we could collect PRAPARE? And really we try to leave a wide spectrum of places and people that can answer the PRAPARE questions. So it's really available across the spectrum. And really the method you have for collecting could be a lot of different options. So eClinicalWorks does offer a smart form that we've developed with them. There's also just structured data. You could do it in the population health module, patient portals, kiosks, lots of options out there. However, the groups that I'm focused on that I've been working with primarily have been doing this at a resource appointment, during the rooming process, or even a non-clinical appointment. And so the other thing that we're starting to see is those alternative collection methods. So we had started out at our pilot before PRAPARE was finalized, so kind of in that testing phase where we had developed structured data in the social history section. And from there, we moved on to creating a smart form so that it would be just a little bit cleaner and easier way to see it. And then now we're starting to see some people taking a look at implementing it using the eClinicalWorks kiosk, where the patient could fill it out on a tablet like an iPad, or even those Scantron sheets, what they call bubble sheets, or the patient portal. So I think the alternative methods are more about pushing some of the documentation effort onto the patient and lightening up the staff. It's really, especially in light of the multitude of things that we need to collect in the comprehensive assessments to meet PCMH 2017 and various Medicaid redesign initiatives or ACOs. So we can see the second method on the screen here represents the resource appointment. So that would be potentially scheduled before the clinical appointment, and I do have a number of groups that have used that option. Some of them already had that time set aside to do things there that didn't necessarily need a clinical person. So that a lot of it was that comprehensive assessment, all those questionnaires that we have to get through. And those can be done by non-clinical staff, so it doesn't have to be a nurse or an MA. It could be a number of other people that are just trained to ask the questions. And the advantage of that is that it really does free up the clinical staff, but you have to have some good workflow, and the staffs have to have some training on that. And then in the middle, we can see a workflow option of during the rooming process that's implemented by a lot of groups as well, that they incorporate PRAPARE into the actual rooming process. And that could be done using your MA or LPN or community health worker that could step in between the time that the MA would complete rooming. So I've taken your vitals, gotten the basic questions done, and then that in-between time until the provider walks in. And that can work well if you have a large amount of time where the patient's waiting for the provider, and it could reduce some burden. But if you have a really quick turnaround time between the time that you've roomed the patient and taken their vitals and the provider comes in, then this may not be the right place to do it. So it is a good option, just depends on how it would work in with your particular schedule. I threw in an option during the clinical exam. Technically, the provider could do it, and I know a couple of them will do it. So maybe not something that you would do on a regular basis, but it's available for them to do. If something pops up and they really want to get the information, they could use the PRAPARE smart form in eClinicalWorks, and they could just quickly go through those questions and do it. Now, this may not be really feasible in a lot of situations because the providers already have a lot of clinical things to do. So I just throw it out there as an option. I know some providers feel strongly that everybody could do it. And then we also have the last option here is a completely non-medical appointment. So it could be behavioral health or a case management or enabling services appointments. Now, this gets it outside of the realm of the clinical. It doesn't impact any patient flow, so that can be helpful. They probably already are asking similar questions, so it's a good place to leverage. And you don't have to pick just one. So you could literally use many of these all at the same time and really go with the no wrong door approach that NAC has always promoted. So lots of options out there. So the status of the New York pilots and that kind of current utilization, all of the New York pilot groups and the groups that we're working with are using the smart form. I have one group that does still use the structured data without the smart form. So Hudson River was in the initial pilot and just didn't implement the smart form because they already had a process that was working. I do have a group that is currently using the ECW kiosk, and they're using a mobile tablet so that they've put all the same questions that come from the smart form or a number of them, kind of tailored it down, and they use it on the kiosk. And that kiosk is really not one of those devices that you see that's that you would sit down in front of or stand in front of. This would be on a mobile tablet that they would just hand the patient. They had looked at doing bubble sheets. They ran into some technical challenges with it. Although it is an option, it's not really supported heavily by eClinicalWorks. They've tried to move away from bubble sheet. They just are prone to have a lot of issues when you're trying to scan forms into the system where it would pick up specific bubbles if it wasn't lined up exactly right. So probably not the highest level of technology. So let's take a moment and switch over. I just want to show you what the PRAPARE Smart Form looks like. So on the PRAPARE Smart Form, the top portion is all pulled with the exception of this date and completed field. So you can pretty easily pick today's date. That just helps us keep track of things of when the patient took the form. It was just helpful. The demographics, patient name all the way through veteran comes from demographics. So this is not something they're going to type. It's going to pull in from my patient. So here we can see their address information, race, ethnicity, language, insurance, and then we pulled in the class as well, since there's a lot of different insurance names that may not jump out. So as long as the insurance class is loaded in your system, it would show that that's a Medicaid product. The income level is based on the sliding fee scale, and I'll show you that quickly. And they're at 95% of poverty. Now, the one ICD-10 code that ECW put out there is because they forgot to take it off. It did recommend or suggest that based on that, there is an ICD-10 code you might want to add to the problem list as E59.5. And then the migrant, seasonal, and veteran questions also come from demographics. I'm going to close this really quickly without saving, just so I could quickly show you on my test patient where that's coming from. So all the information you see in demographics, a lot of it comes from this section over here. So Spanish is my primary language, Hispanic, and my race. And then the structured data is where the migrant, the seasonal, veteran, and homeless question comes from. And then over here, where we have the insurance information, I had added insurance, and that Medicaid is what triggered that information. And then the sliding fee scale is where you would enter information about how much income they have, how many dependents. Once you hit calculate, the poverty level populates. So behind the scenes, we have all that information. If you wanted the actual number and dependents, we don't display that on the smart form. There was some concern about that information. The user group preferred to just display the poverty level, since that really is more meaningful from a provider perspective than the dollars. However, if you wanted to import it into a report, it's still available. It would just be in the demographics section. So let's go back to our smart form. So as you can see, everything pulled over, saves you the work. We also do not let you edit that section. that was requested by the user group, since the front end typically puts that and they don't want conflicting information or people that are not trained on the UDS demographics to be editing that. If I scroll down, we'll see the various sections of the smart form that match up with the prepare tool. So what is your housing? So the homeless question out there is not on this form particularly, just because we ended up moving it. So this housing is different slightly than the UDS question, so it is separate. So this person indicated they have housing, but they're worried about losing their housing. So different than UDS. Similar but different. And then the highest level of school that they finished, so we can just go through, answer all of the questions. And then if they've gone without anything, so there are different needs, and they would just answer those questions. If they didn't have any, they could always pick the I don't have any problems. And that just helps us know that we didn't skip those questions and that they didn't have any needs. So that was the reason why that's slightly different than the paper tool. The transportation question is a multi-select, so you could ask both questions. And then the social and emotional health. How stressed are they? And then we have the additional or optional questions. We've just relabeled that as additional so that people didn't think, that they were optional. Just sounded a little bit better in the title. And then we could indicate information. If you said yes, that you spent 2 nights in jail, there is a release date child question that will pop up, and they can answer that question. Now, unfortunately, when NAC had made a change to the prepare tool that's out there today, the country of origin was removed from the paper tool. However, we had already developed the eClinicalWorks smart form, and ECW couldn't remove the question that was already there. However, organizations that don't want their staff to answer that can always break the mapping and do what I did and put the word not used in front of it. Some groups have chose to continue with that, but that's the best that I can give you right now, or just break the mapping and unmap that question, and you could literally just make that invisible. So behind the scenes, it's still there. And then, do you feel physically and emotionally safe? And fear of partner. And you'll notice what's different than the prepare tool that's on paper is that the eClinicalWorks user group had asked that we add a score. So this is just a tally score. It is not risk adjusted. It has nothing to do with the level of severity. It's not like a PHQ-9 or an audit C where the numbers put you in a specific category. However, it is helpful for us to know how many of these things are impacting the patient, just so that you could do some population health analysis if you wanted to look at those patients with the highest score. So that was helpful from that perspective, and I will give you the tally logic behind it. That is in the slides that you'll also have a copy of. Now, the other additional item that we did to make this Prepare Plus, the plus part is we also added the enabling services option. So not every group was documenting enabling services. So if they want to document them on the form, they can. We followed APCHO for the most part on their enabling services project. I think there's just 1 or 2 extra codes that were added that one of our other organizations had kind of expanded it slightly just due to some grant needs. And so they could select anything that was done, and that would also be stored as structured data. And then once they hit save, the smart form will be stored in social history. So you can see it on the progress note. All the information is listed out there. And you'll see an older one. That was just the older method that I had. I didn't delete that out. And then the other item, let me show you a couple other little tricks with this. So in the history section, social history, you would see the social determinants of health, and then the prepare. So all that information, it's a little bit busy, but the information is available out there. It's also available under patient documents. And you'll see the prepare tool. So you could also open up the paper version, which looks like it's a scanned document. So that information is out there. If you needed to write some additional information, there is one of the note sections that doesn't open up appropriately. So we've tried to work around that a little bit. So just like anything else in eClinicalWorks, if you click on the black font, the little bubble window will show up, and you can go through and you would be able to add notes to any of the sections out there. So that's pretty helpful if you wanted to elaborate on it. If they're worried about housing, you could just make a note about why are they worried about housing. So all that information is available out there for various documentation. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over to the slides. So just a quick note on the Prepare tool itself. We originally were trying to get eClinicalWorks to have a suggestion, a pop-up, some text, or something that would suggest various problems to add to the problem list or ICD-10 coding. Unfortunately, they were concerned about adding ICD-10 coding. They did not feel comfortable with it, so that is not out there. We also were trying to get structured data and have some CPT codes for the enabling services that if you selected one, that CPT codes would appear so that you could have those same codes as APCHO is using. They also were not comfortable with that. So we've had to do a little workaround. So, you know, when we look at enabling services, we can use just the plain structured data. You could create an order set inside of eClinicalWorks and link that, you know, just create a procedure instead of using the structured data. Procedures can be configured in each client system to populate with CPT codes and even ICD-10 codes if you wanted. Some groups have used bubble sheets. That would be Hudson River has been doing that for many years. You could give them a quick reference guide, so a piece of paper or even a template. Other options could even be like a ICD-10 folder called Social Determinants of Health. So there are a lot of different options out there for coding, but for enabling services, this is what we're seeing. We have found that people have been using the data in a lot of different ways. So obviously, most people are trying to figure out how many patients have completed Prepare. It has been very helpful in identifying patients' key needs and determining what enabling services they're providing for the patients that actually have needs. Some groups have been able to expand or streamline their community resources. So Hudson River is a great example. They already had a transportation grant. They actually had 2 or 3 of them for their farm workers, but found that the staff were not aware of it, and it was so complicated that the patients weren't using it. So based on the information they got from using Prepare, they met with their transportation various organizations, and they developed a better methodology. So that was a great success story. A lot of people are using them as registries. Azara has put the social determinants of health information and has mapped the Prepare tool to their pre-visit planning report, and they also have a registry report. So that's been pretty helpful. I think we're still early on that to see how that's working. They've essentially broke the various categories and put the tally for that out there, and they have their own tally, but they'll work with each of the clients to do the mapping. We've used Prepare with Medicaid redesign. So as the state is trying to find ways to reduce costs, that's out there. We also have the RIOs that have been extremely interested in Prepare, and we've met with eClinicalWorks and the RIOs recently, and we're trying to get some changes made on the CCDA, the transition to care summaries that are sent out. Of course, once you make this change, it would be sent to all organizations, so it's kind of a little bit larger scope. What they've asked for from a RIO perspective is they would like to see the UDS demographics field, so veteran, farm worker, homeless, and poverty. So that's kind of a new thing. So they had some information from demographics, but they didn't have these pieces. So ECW is working on that. And the RIOs also have been trying to use the ICD-10 codes or SNOMEDs that come through that are linked to that on the CCD. So that's how the RIOs are able to use some of the PRAPARE information and share it with the other organizations. Unfortunately, you can't really share the rest of the PRAPARE tool because there's not a SNOMED linkage to all of that structured data. So that's kind of been a health information exchange challenge. I've also included all of the screens that you saw, so you can always take a look at these slides here. But I wanted to focus on the tally score. So a lot of questions come up is how did we come up with this tally score? So you can see each of the tallies would get 1 point unless I've specified differently on this page. So the difference on the tally would be if we felt like the high school versus less than high school, instead of just making it a single tally, we did give you 2 points for less than high school. Same thing for employment and social integration and stress. The rest of the items are all a single tally of 1 point. This was just a way to come up with some numerical scale. It could be adjusted later, probably not through the PRAPARE tool. I know CPCI is using a straight tally. They're not using any double numbers, so that's kind of their methodology as well. I had one group, just as a side note, that had looked at putting this in population health and actually had built it. They did pull that back and decide to go back to the SMART form. They just like the way that it viewed. If they do use the population health tool from eClinicalWorks, you could build any tally that you want. So it's totally up to the client on that. So there's a lot of different options out there is what we would say. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. And then the last part really is the various ICD-10 codes. So this would match up with information from NAC. I'm sure there's more ICD-10 codes people could look at, but these are the ones that we have suggested. So there's not a long list, and you'll notice that there's not an ICD-10 code for everything in the PRAPARE tool. So that's kind of my wish list, is that I didn't think I would ever say that, but ICD-10 codes, we need a few more. That I think all of the items in the PRAPARE tool should have an ICD-10 code developed for them. So would like to see that at some point in the future. And I'd like to see some standardization about how the information could be shared with the RIO. So maybe some CCD enhancements of what makes sense. If it's possible, it may be all linked to the ICD-10 information. So that's what I have. Hopefully this has been helpful. Hope to talk to everybody after that.